The desire to be in control is probably the opposite of the spirit of love. And sometimes it's easy to think that the best way to show love is by being controlling. It's very common for a parent or a spouse to think that they know what's best for their significant other or their child, so much that they will do things which are unkind in the name of the greater good. And we wonder sometimes why the things we pursue evade us. And the reason for that is because people have, at the core of their being, a fundamental desire for liberty. Perhaps we all share a certain desire for the safe harbor of decorum, of respect and good manners. But we also have a desire to be free. We have a desire to give consent to the things that we do with our lives. And I think it's important for us to learn not to be so determined to be in control. There's something really toxic about finding something that you think is good, something that you think is lovely, and then trying to make it part of your life. And as soon as you've got it in your grasp, proceeding to try to reinvent it into something else. That's disingenuous. You like the wild animal because it's free in nature, living in its own natural habitat. And then you proceed to try to tame it and put it into captivity. But isn't that the opposite of the reason why you found it to be majestic to begin with? You thought that it was beautiful because it was free, and so you tried to take away its freedom. You liked something because it was alive, and so you took its life. And then you wondered why, perhaps, it sought to escape, why it pushed you away. That's true that sometimes we do have wisdom that others don't have. Sometimes we also think we do and we don't. That's also true. But you can't force your wisdom on other people. And you also can't respect people if you think that you're wiser than they are all the time. There's a lot of disingenuous activity that masquerades as love. But the truth is, if you really love something, if you really love someone, then you have to respect what they are and what they are not. And that doesn't mean that you just pretend to respect them while you secretly are seething inside in fury and agitation about everything that they stand for. Imagine a parent that's frustrated because their children don't live up to their values. And so they proceed to spend all of their time passively or directly reminding their children of the values they think those children should espouse. See, if you're that parent, you might think to yourself that you're trying to mold your child into something better. But really all you're doing is telling them that you don't really love them for who they are. You love a vision of them which you've crafted. And you hate any part of them that doesn't align with that standard. So you see, it's really not them that you love at all. It's your fantasy of them that you love. It's being able to be in control that you love. Because if you take away the control element, the power dynamic, then maybe there isn't any love at all. If you had no power to change a person, would you still value having them in your life? That's perhaps a better test. And if you can learn to see good genuinely in those who you claim to love, in the things you claim to love, and stop having an objective, stop having that urge to immediately pivot from saying that's nice to how can I control it? How can I master it? How can I make it better? Then you can just be present. Present in the moment and thankful for what it is. Exactly as it is. And when you're genuine, when you treat people in a way that's truly loving, then sometimes you'll find that they will come to you for advice. They'll respect you when you stop disrespecting them. That's not such a crazy idea at all. And yet, for some of us, it's a revolutionary concept. We think that if we shout louder, others will join our team, join our side, align with our faction. But the reality is, what we need to do is look at others and genuinely say, what do they have right? What are they doing better? That doesn't mean that you're going to ever find somebody who you really think does better at everything than you. But you can find something to like about everyone. You don't have to go out of your way to endorse things that you don't think are good. But that doesn't mean that you have to rage against them either. It's okay to just accept that other people have different paths. Paths which might appear to be in conflict with your own. And yet, just as ants and anteaters live in the same natural world, and you can like both and hate neither, and accept that they both are always going to be the hunter and the hunted. It's not a contradiction. You can admire them without wanting to be an anteater. And so it is with all the people and the various things and our vocations and our hobbies in life. It's possible to have a personal opinion about something that you don't think is ideal, while you predominantly spend your time celebrating the things you think are lovely. Maybe I enjoy this particular game that I'm playing. And yet, perhaps the truth is that there's some things that I don't particularly like about the game. And that's the truth. If I said this is a perfect game, which couldn't be made better, without any faults, and there's not a better game out there in any particular way, well, that would be false, because there are other games that do things better than this particular one. And that's okay. For one thing, because it's my opinion. I'm not asking others to agree with me. And secondly, because the fact that I'm playing this game is proof that overall, I see more to love than to hate. And so I focus on the things that I enjoy about the experience. And I overlook the others. Because I understand that for every feature that I don't like, someone else does like it. I understand that nature is under no obligation to be tailored to my demands anyway. And I genuinely see more good than bad. And isn't that how a relationship ought to be? Any relationship ought to be that way. You can point out things. If you wanted to, you could point out things that you're not crazy about in your partner or something. Or a child, if you are a parent, whatever it might be. It's not that you are just completely blind or opinionless. That's not the point. The point is that love has to be genuine. Just like if I log into this game every day and my main thoughts are always, I would enjoy my experience if it was just a little bit more perfect. If it didn't suck so much, then maybe I'd have fun. But as it is, I'm just going to complain about it, and I'm going to try to make sure everyone else knows too while I'm at it, just how much of a bad experience I'm having. Now I will say, just to be completely honest, sometimes it's quite difficult to not fall into the trap of having a questionable attitude toward other people. And sometimes we do fall into the trap of having a bad attitude or being judgmental or allowing ourselves to be more frustrated than loving. I'd also take a moment to point out that sometimes we can say that you should go along with something because you ought to be a loving person. And we'll say that we should just go along with something because we don't have the courage to establish boundaries in our life. And that's also not good. Because you can love others and you can still have a position. You can still take a stand on things that you believe in. But you see, when you take a stand for things you believe in, that has to be a personal stand, not an agenda to force someone else to believe in them too. You see, I would take a stand not to drink alcoholic beverages because that's my personal choice. But when I start to judge other people for that choice, then that's a completely different thing than it is having that conviction of my own free will and accord. And yet, I certainly can make choices about what sort of things I want to do. So, going out for a night on the town is not my thing. I'm not going to go hang out in a bar because that's not my lifestyle. And as a result of that, there's bound to be a certain wall of separation between me and people who are defined by a lifestyle that's foundationally different than my own. And yet, that distance doesn't necessarily mean a barrier of camaraderie. It doesn't mean that there can't be closeness in other ways. Respect, though, means that I will respect a person's differences enough not to impose myself on them. And also not to harbor any thoughts of judgment, to say, I think that I'm more right than they are because my perspective differs. And that's not to say that there isn't a bit of duality there, because obviously I think that my way of life is the best way to live. If I didn't think that, then I wouldn't be living that way, would I? But I can also concede that my position is not infallible. That for every valid point that I could make, someone else with a different perspective could make a equally valid point, which I would also have to take to heart. Embracing that attitude that you're not entirely certain that you're right, you just, based on your personal understanding in the moment, have no better logic to go off of. Being willing to change your mind if there's ever a time when you're exposed to a body of data which seems to lend itself to proving that you're wrong. Being willing to change doesn't mean that you will. It's just being willing to consider the possibility. Can build a lot of bridges. But the truth is, we tend not to listen because we know exactly what our position is. We know that the other side is wrong. So even if we do listen, usually all we're doing is pausing enough to give someone else the perception that we're listening. The truth is, the minute they start talking, we turn our listening ears off and we just wait for them to shut up so that we can tell them the real truth as we see it. We have these attitudes, that desire to control, the desire to be right, and we hang on to them. And then we grow just a little more bitter every day, a little more set in our ways, a little bit more incapable of embracing that spirit of love. And one thing I will say is that there's a great deal of talk of tolerance and inclusion. And I am not particularly fond of those words in the sense that they imply we include something because it was separated. They imply that we tolerate something because we hated it. And if you tolerate someone when you oppose everything that they are, that's not love. And if you go out of your way to include someone who you don't want to include, that's also not love. And it really boils down to, it's not what you do, it's how you do it, often, which counts the most. And that's why some people do have love in their lives and other people don't. Because there is a point where all that really matters is the truth. Of where you were coming from. Spiritually. What your motives were. That's what matters. Not how you acted. Not what you said. But whether you really meant it when you told someone that you loved them. And the question is this: would you love them if they didn't do what you wanted them to do? That's the real question. And if the answer is yes, then you're coming from the right place. But if the answer is no, then it probably was never really genuine to begin with. I think by that standard, a lot of people go through their whole lives and they say they love their work, they love their job, they love their family, they love their hobbies, they love their path that they've chosen in life. And yet, that entire experience from end to end is defined by running along on a treadmill, raging against all the things that aren't good enough, rolling out more designs for how to take what you have and redesign it into something better. Essentially, the truth is, a lot of people are unhappy because they've spent their entire lives hating things. And they've spent so much time doing that, in fact, that they've started to believe that hate is a form of love. But love is not the outstretched hand that throws out, grain for a deer to eat. The outstretched hand that holds the grain out there in hopes that the deer will come up and eat out of the feeder's hand. Not really. Because if you're that person, all right, you know you're going to feed a deer. You know that the deer isn't comfortable coming up to you. You know it doesn't want to eat out of your hand. But you don't respect that. So you try to change the nature of that wild animal, hoping it'll be desperate enough to overcome its fear and trust you enough to be vulnerable. That sounds kind of quaint, I suppose. But it's not very loving, is it? Because if you really accepted the creature as it was, wouldn't you just lay out that grain in a place where the animal would feel comfortable approaching it, and then give it some space? Wouldn't that be the way to respect its role and place in nature, much more than trying to coerce it? If you truly love something, you have to be willing to set it free. But that's not to say that sometimes the things you do set free don't come back anyway. In due time. But even if they don't, you get the benefit of being able to love them anyway. And even if it's not everything you ever wanted, that is a gift in itself. So wherever your journey takes you, always make time. Love those with whom you share it. Thank you for watching.